This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. How scientific do you think we are? I don't mean what grades did you get in your GCSEs. I'd be fairly near the back of the queue. That I often feel my father and my mother should have been due for a refund. So poorly did I perform in some of my science exams. I also fell into that trap. Do you think I'll ever start the show one day and actually go in the direction I was intending to go when the light came on? Why am I telling you about my GCSE results? I'm about to go into a bit of a sort of personal ramble about that tragedy, that peculiarly British tragedy where we can almost be proud of being bad at maths and science. I was very much in that category, to my eternal regret. But when I say how good do you think we are, how scientific do you think we are, I'm thinking more of you ringing me to tell me something and how likely it is that we actually get a helpful snapshot of the broader public view. Now, on some subjects, that is simply not going to happen. For example, well, maybe it would now, but for a long time, this programme, in the context of Brexit, was dedicated to dealing in facts, when at least 52% of the country remained addicted to, at the very best, feelings, and at worst, of course, the blatant lies of the Johnsons and the Rees-Moggs and the Farages and the rest of them. So you were never going to get a snapshot, I don't think, of broad public opinion on this programme by going in on a very heavily invested subject like that. Oddly, looking at the opinion polls, I suspect if we do a broad political sweep, we're not far off the numbers that are now being reflected in the polls. If, say, 1 in 5 callers was a Tory voter, you'd probably have a fair reflection of that in the way that the switchboard responded to a broader political question. But I'm interested today, I'm just looking at the first texts that have come in, actually, since I mentioned a moment ago, just before Nick clocked off, that I want to turn your attention first today to Chris Packham's comments about protesting outside MPs' houses. Now, for me, at first glance, that issue is a no-brainer. It's a no-go zone, actually, to use a phrase that Paul Scully has managed to bring back into public discourse. Shortly before turning Westminster into a no-go zone for himself by announcing that he won't be standing at the next election. But I've always thought that is one line we do not cross as a society. But the first text to come into the programme this morning are these. One from Anthony in Surrey, one from Michael in Fulham. I think if MPs use their role, writes Anthony, to enhance their personal life over the interests of the public, then the public should be able to protest in a way that affects the MP's personal life. And in the same moment, both at 10:02 this morning, Michael writes, if the politician is a lying, lazy scrounger like Johnson or any of his crooked gang, then protest outside their homes is acceptable. They treat us like sewage. It should work both ways. The problem with both of those perspectives, lads, is that you don't get to decide whose home is fair game and whose home isn't. I think once you've ignited the green light, then even the politicians you consider to be honest and honourable and dripping with integrity become fair game, and their homes become targets for the people that you would find problematic at best and repellent at worst. Actually, I lied to you. There was a text that came in at 10:01, actually, from Simon, who says, I just wanted to say good luck to your team in tonight's game against my team, Woking. It's a vital game for both teams, so may the best team win. There's a mythical 6 points available. There really is. It's an absolute relegation dogfight at the bottom of the National League, and Kiddie Woking, or rather Woking Kiddie, because we're away, is going to be potentially an absolutely crucial moment in that saga. What was it I said a minute ago about going off on unexpected and unscripted? Unscripted? Do me a favour. Have you heard this show before? Unexpected and unplanned tangents. Well, there we are. 8 minutes after 10. And, you know, while we're on the subject, Angie's been in touch to mention a call she made yesterday about talking about Robert Jenrick's dog whistle yesterday. She says, you clipped it up for LBC. Predictably, a good proportion of the replies on Twitter are telling me to go home. Point proven, says Angie. You know, quite often people who reply, particularly to the LBC tweets, don't realise they're proving the point made in the tweet. So have a look at that from Angie. And I mention it only because, do you remember, were you listening to Mystery Hour on Thursday? Were you listening to Mystery Hour? When we took a call from Acme Whistles in Birmingham, from the official archivist of Acme Whistles, to answer a question about whistles. They've sent me a dog whistle. Which I've got use for a dog whistle because I'm not a member of the Tory cabinet. I haven't got them coming out of my ears. But I may try it out on you a little later in the programme and see whether or not it sends your dog nuts at the other end of the microphone. There's probably Ofcom rules about that sort of thing. So Chris Packham, who I think is a force for good. I think he is a national treasure. I've got a growing regard for the tiny number of people in the public eye who refuse to be quiet. You probably haven't noticed this, but you can count on one hand. For a while, I think, until Carol Vorderman set her targets on the government, you could count on one finger the number of people with serious public profiles in this country that would use them to criticise the direction of political traffic. And that one finger would essentially count Gary Lineker, who simply tweets every now and then about his unhappiness regarding the behaviour of politicians and some policies, the direction of traffic, the language that is used to talk about refugees. In a normal country, you would barely notice Gary Lineker's tweets. That's no offence to Gary, but in a normal country, you would barely notice those tweets. But in a country that is in a stranglehold of the worst kind of right-wing media, he sticks out like a sore thumb. He's gone from being a finger to a thumb there in the space of about 10 seconds. He sticks out like a sore thumb because everybody is frightened. Oh, that's not true. Some people agree with the direction of traffic. There's a column in the Mail today praising France for deporting someone who I think can be fairly described as an Islamist hate preacher. And they managed to get through the whole column saying, why can't we be more like France, without mentioning that they told us to vote for Brexit so that it would be easier to deport people like this Islamist hate preacher in France. It's quite extraordinary how boiled and bent their brains are now. But it's even more extraordinary how few people get to say what they truly believe and have the... What's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say courage, although that is part of it. But the problem with praising one man's courage is that you essentially paint another person, another woman, another man as being cowardly. And I don't want to do that because I don't think that's fair. But you have to possess something, a thickness of skin perhaps, a security, a financial security, never mind a personal security. But for example, to invite the guns of Rupert Murdoch or Paul Dacre to do their worst, you have to be possessed, I think, of some fairly special skills, some fairly strong will to do that, which is why so few people do. So Gary does it. Carol does it, and happily she now does it, of course, on LBC. And in very specific areas, Chris Packham does it as well. Increasingly, Chris Packham does it as well. He is motivated by a number of issues. You can listen to a brilliant interview, he was brilliant. I was probably rubbish, but you can listen to a very engaging episode of Full Disclosure with Chris Packham from about a month and a half ago. He's one of the people, as I've mentioned, I think is an enormous force for good. And he is much more laser-like in his targets. He is motivated by a profound love of animals, of wildlife, of the natural world in particular, and of the planet, of course, which means it extends into ecological issues. And it is from there that he has spoken most recently. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. And what he has said is this. He has said that MPs' homes should not be off limits. And he specifies when it comes to eco-protests or Just Stop Oil, for example, who have targeted MPs' homes. I think it was Greenpeace, wasn't it, that got on Rishi Sunak's roof. He wasn't there at the time, but you can never be 110% sure of that. He has Just Stop Oil protested outside the homes of Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. And he has called for, if you like, or he's offered his support to these groups protesting outside homes of MPs. And my gut reaction to this is to disagree. Oh, crikey, Alan in Dover, you're quite right. We forgot about Fergal Sharkey, didn't we, on our list of the good guys. my gut reaction to this is to say, no, you can never, ever do that. I remember when some protesters, they may even have been anti-Brexit protesters, found themselves on Jacob Rees-Mogg's doorstep, and I just thought that it was completely wrong. But when people I admire and respect say things I disagree with, I have a very unfashionable habit of deciding to have a bit of a think about what I believe and what I think about something. And I wondered whether my objection to this is both selfish and embarrassing. Selfish because if it's okay to protest outside a politician's house, then it wouldn't be long before someone argued it's also okay to protest outside a gob on a stick's house, a professional commentator's house, a radio phone-in host's house. So that's perhaps where the selfishness comes from. And the embarrassment, I think, comes from this. And it's not something I've ever noticed before or even thought about. Maybe I just don't care enough about anything. Now, I go on a march. I haven't been on many, but I went on a march for a second referendum because I naively thought that we might be able to stop the madness that everybody is now having their faces rubbed in. I went on a Stop the War march in Glasgow, but largely because I was courting Mrs. O'Brien at the time and she was working there, and I was hardly going to stay in the flat on my own when she went off to march against the looming war in Iraq. And I've been on others. I accidentally went on a vivisection. Well, my father was covering it for the Daily Telegraph, actually, and I sort of found myself getting caught up in a protest at a mink farm, would you believe, in Staffordshire. But that doesn't count because I was there even more by accident than I was on the Stop the War march. But I look at everything from, I mean, the news today, you've got more evidence of appalling sexual violence, rape and sex crimes being perpetrated by Hamas during the October the 7th attack. You've got a report. So I mention that because the passion you feel when calling for the release of the hostages that are still held goes to places that perhaps traditional protest cannot reach. Similarly, you've got reports coming in of children now starving to death in Gaza on an unprecedented scale, and the frustration, the visceral frustration and horror you feel at that story may want you to urge politicians to change course, to do more in a way that they don't currently do. They are not currently hearing your cries, so you're going to have to cry louder. But of course, that's a metaphorical description. It means you're going to have to find a new way of being heard. So you get outside their home. Oh, of course, Jamie Oliver and Marcus Rashford. There's more people than I realised on this list. I may have to rejig the paperback version of How They Broke Britain in order to acknowledge a few more heroes of our time, a few more national treasures. But that was where I ended up this morning. I thought, well, listen, to me, Chris Packham is obviously wrong. You can't protest outside someone's home. But maybe that's because I don't actually care enough, even about the situation in Gaza. I don't think that's the answer. I think that I do. But I don't feel any urge to protest outside someone's home. Would a suffragette have done that? Probably. Are there points in history where protesting outside a politician's home has proved a point in a way that protesting anywhere else could not? We're living in an era where politicians are trying to close down our rights to protest on an unprecedented scale. It is, when you dig into it, quite frightening what's going on. But that leaves us with a happily binary radio phone in question. But I really want the why of it. Okay? Because telling me whether you think we or they, I wonder if your answer's different. Should we be able to protest outside an MP's home? Question mark. Definitely not. Should they be able to protest outside an MP's home? Definitely not. But does it change a little bit? Should we be able to protest outside? Well, yeah, we would, because we'd be really, well behaved and respectful and peaceful. Should they be? No, God, no. Down with that. Down with them. They're splitters. So I want the why of it, not just the what of it. The what of it is easy. What do you think? Should we be? I mean, are there issues now from which politicians appear to be so completely distracted, detached from where you sit and where you feel the people sit, that you should actually be able to take the fight to their front doorstep? Or is it obvious to you that is a door that we should never sanction going through? I don't necessarily think that anyone who does it should be strung up from the nearest lamppost, but there should be sanctions in place, preventative sanctions, deterrence. But I want the why of it, okay? I want the why of it. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Hit those numbers now, you will get through. I'm pretty clear that I don't think it should ever happen, but I'm just wondering out loud with you whether or not that comes from a healthy place, whether that comes from an authentic place, or whether it comes from a fear of offering up my own home next, because where politicians lead, journalists often follow, or indeed whether it is because I just don't understand the level of frustration, the level of anger even, the level of heartbreak that prompts people to take steps that the rest of us find remarkable. And I think that's probably most pertinent in the context of the environmental threat. This belief, this inability to understand how the rest of the world is failing to appreciate the urgency of the situation. And if you can't do it normally, you're going to have to find new ways of doing it. And we're not talking about anything other than peaceful protest, all right? We're not talking about, in the first instance, nothing but peaceful. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 19 minutes after 10.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
Well, I sometimes get texts from you, and I read them and I think, someone's yanking your chain, or that would be a brilliant made-up answer in the Mystery Hour board game. Do you know why the Duke of Wellington became known as the Iron Duke? I bet you don't, and I'll give you a tiny clue. All right, it's relevant to the conversation we're having about protesting outside MPs' homes, which Chris Packham has said should be permitted. Partly, I think, because the issue he cares most about, in this case, environmental protest, environmental emergency, is one that trumps any niceties or conventions regarding peaceful protest outside a politician's home. But what do you think, and crucially, why? Alex is in Newcastle. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on. I just want to say that politicians come to our doors knocking on it and demanding votes. Journalists come to the doors of celebrities and people in the news demanding photos and interviews. Why shouldn't everyday people come to the doors of the people in charge of votes on genocide and cost of living crises and climate crises and say, hey, please represent us because you're not doing a very good job right now?
God, I hadn't thought. I don't know that the politician's example is as powerful as the press example, because a politician knocks on your door. You might as well complain about the postman coming round. You can just say, not today, thank you, off you trot. It's like an encyclopedia salesman, if such a thing still exists. But goodness me, the press and all of the newspapers writing up Chris Packham's comments as if it's the end of the world as we know it will park people at the bottom of your front path and have people putting all sorts of things through your letterbox and fighting with each other to get a microphone. I mean, one thinks again of, I think this programme has almost been sponsored by Gary Lineker today, but every time he tweets something they don't like, they're camped outside his house. The poor fella can barely walk his dog without coming under constant pressure. But I don't think I'm ducking the issue when I say two wrongs don't make a right, do they?
Oh, absolutely not. But I think in this case, when the wrong is genocide or everyone is probably going to die from food crises because of the climate crisis, then I think protesting outside somebody's house in a peaceful, respectful manner is absolutely okay when protest is being clamped down in every other sector of society. You can't protest outside oil and gas companies, outside petrol stations. You can barely protest outside Parliament anymore, and nobody will ever listen to you when you do. So I think, sadly, it needs to happen.
You remind me that the only time we talk about protests is when they go somewhere or achieve something that protests don't normally achieve. So in a sense,
exactly.
the message you're reiterating, and it's not one you're endorsing, is you can protest wherever you want as long as it doesn't make any difference to anything or anybody.
Yes.
So don't stop the traffic, whatever you do. Don't stop the traffic and don't disrupt an MP's home life. Just out of interest, is it something you would do yourself? Or are you speaking to me as a philosopher?
In a peaceful manner,
yeah.
I think I would, yeah. If what you're protesting for is valid enough, then absolutely. And if you're talking about the genocide of 20,000 children in Gaza, then yeah.
You've used that word a lot, which is obviously challengeable and must be challenged. I don't feel the need to challenge the phrase ethnic cleansing at the moment, looking at the situation on the ground in Gaza, but I do challenge the use of the word genocide. We'll wait upon the findings of the International Court in The Hague on that question, which at the moment seem a long way off. But of course, that is what you believe to be occurring, and therefore the passion with which you would want to protest or call for a cessation of hostilities is going to lead you to places that you wouldn't go in defence of other causes. Thank you, Alex. I've got a horrible feeling that the selfish explanation of my own motivation is the one that I'm going to be reaching for first. I just sort of think, well, I don't care how passionately you feel about that. Why on earth would you come outside? Because remember, you know, the kind of people that are going to protest outside my house are not people who care passionately about the future of the planet or indeed their fellow citizens. They're going to be furious with someone who doesn't hate foreigners enough, or who refuses to conflate all Muslims with terrorists and extremists, or who keeps getting proved right about Brexit and Boris Johnson and Donald Trump and even Jeremy flipping Corbyn. There's not going to be anybody outside my house calling upon me to do something that I have any power to do except to shut up and stop saying things they don't like hearing, because they don't blame themselves for what they see in the mirror. They blame the mirror. And how do you police that? Is that selfish, or is that just the personal perspective that informs an objective one? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. 0345 6060973. Rob's in Sheffield. Rob, what do you think?
I think that we need a private life. And I say we because I'm a elected city councillor, and I realise that we go out there and we knock on doors and we deliver leaflets, but we've got families, we've got private lives. Being switched on all the time and having a mobile phone and having an email address means that we are out there, but sometimes you do just need to switch off. And the previous caller said, yes, but you go and knock on your own door, our doors.
Yeah.
Yes, but when someone says to me, actually not now, or I don't vote for you, or actually can we not have this conversation? I say, okay, yeah, sure, that's fine, and then I move on.
And that's why I put you in the same category as a charity collector or a door-to-door salesman. It's if you stick your foot in my door at that point and say, no, hang on a minute, we're the Liberal Democrats. That's the point at which your behaviour becomes unacceptable. But you can't do that with a peaceful protest. You can't go out onto your doorstep and say, all right, could you move along now, please? Thank you. So it does feel as a breach of something quite special, significant.
Yeah, and this is it. It is, if I receive an email or a phone call, as I have since I was elected, of someone spouting conspiracy theories or being really quite vile, and I won't share some of the topics, but I do generally just go, you know what, I'm not going to respond to that.
Yes.
Because it's not my prerogative. I'd love to be able to respond, but I know it wouldn't help. And there is this breaking down, and I see these videos online of, we've set up camp outside this MP's office or this MP's home. Now, the family are probably incredibly supportive of the politician, but they need privacy. There might be children there might be a wife.
And not just politicians' homes, but also, do you remember when they kind of a rampaging mob hit a vaccine centre during the lockdown? Some places should. That's not a peaceful protest. I guess there's a difference. Also, peaceful is nuanced, isn't it? If you're protesting outside a family planning clinic, then the psychological impact of you just standing there with a sign or standing there saying a Hail Mary is completely different to what it would be like if you were doing the same thing outside Budgeon's or Waitrose or whatever it may be.
And this is it, is if someone does turn up outside my house, and I might agree with them, but I've got neighbours as well who are going to be impacted by this. And I say to them, guys, I agree with you, could you move on?
And it's unlikely to happen. On the other hand...
Where's that line of peacefulness?
No, I hear you, but the last caller used the word genocide, which a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, are using to describe what's happening in Gaza. It's not a word I use or endorse. Or planetary emergency. They would say to you, how can you possibly be worried about your peace of mind or your neighbours when things of such epic import are unfolding on in our world, and our politicians are doing nothing about them. I grant you, Rob, that a Liberal Democrat councillor in Sheffield is unlikely to be able to halt either anthropocentric climate change or the continuing attacks in Gaza. But my point stands. They'd say to you, how dare you? I mean, who do you think you are worrying about your neighbours when the world is burning?
And I completely understand the argument, but there are places and spaces in the fact that there are meetings, there are times where we come together and we discuss these things, and I have opinions on all of these things that I will happily share in those spaces. But there is a reason why politics is feeling increasingly fraught at the moment,
and it becomes a deterrent. I mean, I talked at the beginning about the thickness of skin, or the personal robustness required to speak out regularly and accurately, in my view, against the direction of political traffic. And of course, the more abuse that a politician receives, the less likely somebody is, however motivated and however passionate, to be drawn to politics. Rob, thank you. Brilliantly articulated. So we've had both sides of the argument, and you can see why I was worried that my response was going to be dictated by my personal circumstances. But then again, whose isn't? 10:32 is the time. Why the Duke of Wellington was known as the Iron Duke could not be more relevant to this conversation. I presumed it had something to do with his behaviour on the battlefield, didn't you? You thought, why is he called the Iron Duke? It's the same reason Margaret Thatcher was called the Iron Lady. Well, kind of, because they were kind of iron-like, irony in their attitudes. No, nothing like that at all. I'll tell you the real reason after the headlines with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:36 is the time. Dan in Brighton writes, here's how I see it, James. I don't lie to people. I don't cause people harm. I live a moral life. I do not hurt anybody. I am not corrupt. I have empathy and compassion. I do not play with other people's lives or emotions. And also, I'm not worried about anyone coming to my front door. It's not rocket science. It is more complicated than that, Dan. I think Tobias Ellwood was the most recent MP to have his home targeted by pro-Palestinian protesters, or peace protesters, Palestinian peace protesters. And he's widely regarded as one of the good guys. Generally, don't at me. I nearly did the curse of O'Brien yesterday on Bim Alifemi after it made our own news bulletins that he had a tweet up describing Donald Trump as a cancer. And I thought, how can that be controversial? Surely that's what all MPs, whatever party they belong to, should be saying. And the ones that are actually cozying up to Donald Trump, like what's her chops, Andrea Jenkins, who had MAGA on her Twitter profile. They're the ones that should be newsworthy, but that's probably just part of the reason why Donald Trump's probably going to be back in the White House by the end of the year. 10:37 is the time. Protesting. I've just had another thought. Be careful. I'm going to be exhausted at this rate. You're not going to stop it. You're just making it unlawful. So looking at what the suffragettes did, the bombing and arson campaign undertaken by the suffragettes as opposed to the suffragists was probably much greater than most people who just sort of fondly and somewhat lazily cite Emmeline Pankhurst and others as forces for good appreciate. Letter bombs, assassinations, IEDs, arson, 4 people killed, I think, between 1912 and 1914, of whom 2 were 24 injured and 4 killed. So it was illegal. So you're not, by saying it should be illegal to protest outside a politician's house, you're not somehow creating a world in which nobody ever protests outside a politician's house. Meaningful social change often comes about through a form of law breaking. But whether or not it should be legal is the more pertinent question today. And at the moment, the consensus is that it really shouldn't. Dan's analysis notwithstanding. Although Phil in Leamington Spa makes a point similarly. Thing is, James, the levels of decency, morality and statesmanship have fallen so low in government, leaving only contempt for the electorate from many of those in government, that they can no longer be afforded any credibility or respect. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and this is simply the manifestation of this. As you yourself stated in your best-selling book, Britain is indeed broken. People have been pushed so far that they are responding in the only way open to them. I'm not going to agree with you at this stage. There's 20 minutes left of this hour, but I don't think that you can do that. It's you don't lose faith in British Parliament simply because Boris Johnson is in it. or was in it. You don't lose faith in British democracy simply because Boris Johnson can get to the top of the tree or Liz Truss can get to the top of the tree. It's our only safeguard against anarchy, against chaos, imperfect institutions, imperfect conventions, imperfect traditions. And it seems to me that protesting outside someone's home is one of those things that gets filed under a safeguard against anarchy, even if it's peaceful protest. Alan's in Manchester. Alan, what would you like to say?
Very much in agreement with your last caller, was it Rob?
Yes, in Sheffield.
Yeah, as a politician in a town, let's have it right, James. You've had 2 MPs murdered. You've had one who's given up at the next election because of threats to his family.
Yeah.
I believe you've got 5
That's Mike Freer,
MPs now. Yeah, Mike Freer. I believe you've got 5 MPs now with more or less permanent police protection.
And a Mayor of London.
Yeah, and Sadiq Khan. So once the template is set, as in, once we've done it once, then it becomes the norm, and you will not get people going into politics, James. For an MP, and I know people call them, but if you've got a protest outside your house, sort of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, when you're in Parliament, or you might be away on parliamentary business, and your wife or your partner rings her up and says, there's people outside the house and you've got your kids there, they're going to sit around and say, you know what, it's not worth it.
Why would I do it?
A local councillor gets stick. I get stick.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I don't go on social media, mate. Because of the stuff that was on there.
Actually, speaking of social media, I once complained to Twitter, as it was then, about someone putting my address up, and it didn't count as a violation. I can't remember exactly why, but it proves your point, doesn't it? Rather neatly, that the social media has made everything worse, and allowing people, legalising peaceful protest on people's doorsteps or encouraging it would only add to that mess. I mean, it's not illegal, really, actually, technically, because no one got arrested outside Tobias Ellwood's house, did they? But we're talking almost about a social convention that we don't see the need to breach. What would you say to somebody, and let's focus on the environment, somebody who is... Did you watch that Leonardo DiCaprio film a couple of years ago? Did you watch Don't Look Up?
No, I've not seen it, James.
It's worth the watch. So someone who is absolutely with full scientific backing.
Oh, sorry, I have.
Yeah.
If it was a bit of a parody.
Yeah, exactly that. Yes, exactly that.
I've seen it. Yeah.
So someone like that academic. So you've got someone listening to this program who cannot believe that this point is not being properly understood by people, and they've tried everything. But they honestly believe if they could somehow get something in front of a politician, if they could just focus their mind on an issue, then they might just achieve a little bit of traction. Tell them why they should go nowhere near a politician's home.
Well, yes. The thing is, I know what people are saying. It's the only way we can get through. But as someone involved in politics, we are aware of what's going on. We are aware of the emails we get. The MPs are aware of what's going on because their office will get emails. People will want to meet them, and there is a way of doing things in this country, and no one's saying it's perfect, James. But the thing is, if nobody goes into politics, I'm talking good people, decent people, then it does attract them. It does attract the more extreme people.
Yeah. It's interesting though, isn't it, that most of the debate is breaking down along personal experience. Well, you, me, James, and Rob all worry it might happen to us, and make valid points as a consequence of that about the deterrent, putting people off coming in, whereas the people who are coming at it from the perspective of protest, I mean, I'd ask them, in fact, I should have asked them, but I mean, does it ever work? Does it ever achieve anything? Could you imagine Jacob Rees-Mogg coming out of his house, walking through a baying mob of Ramonas and deciding that Brexit was a bad idea after all? I mean, there is that point as well to wonder about, isn't there?
Yeah, but the thing is, what will achieve it with Rees-Mogg is when he gets his P45 in May.
Which is another reminder of how the democracy is indeed supposed to work. Alan, thank you, and thank you for what you do as a councillor. Stephen Carter says, you haven't emotionally connected to the fact that MPs are failing to take the action needed to protect us from social collapse. MPs are not attempting to stop what is happening in Gaza. Would you support peaceful protests at their homes if the terror of Gaza was coming to your city and MPs were doing nothing to defend it? That's a brilliant question, Steve. I suspect it's probably rhetorical, but of course, if the terror of Gaza was coming to our city, we wouldn't have the luxury, the energy, the time, or indeed the wherewithal to protest outside politicians' homes, not least because the politicians' homes would have been blown to smithereens by now. But I take the point you're making, and I haven't got an answer to it. I just feel that it is a line society shouldn't cross. And you can tell that my little hooks and teases, which I spent 20 years trying to master, and I'm finally getting the hang of, are working when you get a text like this. For the love of God, are you going to tell us about the Iron Duke? Now, if I was in a very mischievous mood, I'd say yes after this break. But I'm not, so I will. The Iron Duke, the Duke of Wellington, was known as the Iron Duke because he fitted iron bars to the ground floor. That'd be Apsley House, wouldn't it, in London? He fitted iron bars to the ground floor of Apsley House so that the bricks being lobbed at his windows wouldn't actually break them. That's why he was known as the Iron Duke. It had absolutely nothing to do with his prowess or resolve upon the battlefield or in Parliament or anywhere else. He was called the Iron Duke because of, essentially, people protesting outside his home. Albeit nobody, so far on this programme, has advocated the lobbing of bricks at politicians' windows. And if you did, I think it would be a straight red. 10:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
I don't know what it says about us, really, as a team, but you wouldn't believe how many people have been in touch, making the same joke, claiming that the Iron Duke was known thus because of the perfect creases that he always managed to achieve in his trousers. Two thoughts, not a bad joke. I'm a bit confused as to why so many people have reached for it. Is it a trope? Second thought, as any fool know, there's no earthly way the Duke of Wellington would have ironed his own trousers. Do you know what the correct phrase is for the person that would have ironed the Duke of Wellington's trousers? Batman, I think. I think they're called a Batman. I hope I haven't just invented that or dreamt it. I'm pretty sure that they're called a Batman. I used to know a bloke whose dad, very good friend of mine at the time, whose dad was a very, 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 very senior army officer. I can't tell you any more than that because it would actually give away his identity. So senior was he as an army officer. And his dad's Batman, which is not a phrase you hear in common parlance very often, is it? No, his dad's not Batman. That's weird. Everyone knows that's Bruce Wayne. But his dad had a Batman. And his dad's Batman used to do this thing with his uniform. So the uniform would be, and I presume this was for special occasions rather than every day, but to be fair, I never checked. So the uniform would be on a mannequin, right? So you've got Batman, mannequin, uniform on the mannequin. And the Batman would wrap sellotape around his hand, sticky side up. Yeah? Like that. I don't know why I'm sure I said like that. I'm on the bloody radio. Well, you could be watching me on YouTube. So there you go, for all my YouTube fans. Very big in Germany, apparently. Dankeschön. So wrapping all the sellotape, I've turned into Alan Partridge. So wrapping the sellotape around his hand like that. Yeah? And then would do that to the uniform on the mannequin to get off every last little tiny bit of fluff. So anyway, I'm just mentioning that because as if the Duke of Wellington ironed his own trousers. 10:51 is the time. Back to protests outside MPs' homes. I think I asked you right at the top whether or not we would get a scientific view on this. I think we're close to it. I do think we feel it shouldn't be encouraged and possibly it shouldn't even be allowed. But history has taught us that those people who are prepared to break the law in pursuit of their point are sometimes proved right. Tom's in Leeds. Tom, what would you like to say?
Morning, pal. To be honest with you, I could do with a Batman myself.
Can we all?
See the state of my clothes.
We could all do with a Batman. I discovered this morning there are Facebook groups dedicated to those of us who are a little bit obsessed with how to correctly load a dishwasher. So I'm signing up for that next, but that's not why you rang it.
No, it's not. Sorry, pal. So look, it's a bit of an armchair theory, this. I'm not involved in politics in the way that your previous callers were. I was actually I was invited to stand as a Labour candidate when I used to live down south. And I turned it down. I've been a staunch Labour man all my life, but I don't want to see any MP of any side of the House to being harangued like that. I think it felt to me like we crossed the Rubicon in sort of around the Brexit debate where we ticked over into the personal. But I think we were led over there by the MPs themselves.
How do you mean?
Media.
How do you mean tipping? I don't think you. I mean, at first glance, I'm going to disagree with you quite robustly. I think we've been. Look at the Duke of Wellington, mate. He was having bricks lobbed through his window. I don't think tipping over into the personal. That's why it's called the Iron Duke. You know, Tom. I bet you didn't know that.
No, I didn't. It's very interesting.
It's not new, though. What do you mean by the tipping over into the personal?
Well, I think
we will never find out. Defeated by technology. Did you know that my plan to use a dog whistle wouldn't work? Andy in Alicante's been in touch to say that the whistles use a frequency above 23 kilohertz, whereas radio stations cannot transmit audio any higher than 15 kilohertz. And I can thank John Cooper by name, the archivist at Acme Whistles in Birmingham, who rang in to Mystery Hour on Thursday and provided one of our favourite answers of all time. Is Tom back? I should give him another whirl, and then we'll go to James in Spalding. Tom, what do you mean? What do you mean it tipped over into the personal?
Well, I think with the introduction of social media, especially,
yes,
like
you
can access people, directly into their pocket on their personal device, and by email as well. MPs used to get letters, a few letters a week, so they could keep up with correspondence. But now with email, they get thousands and thousands of emails, and I think you get to a point where MPs are frightened to do their job. Now, I think people should be held to account, absolutely, but I think that it sort of led to the scenes that we saw in the House of Commons a couple of weeks ago. But it is, to me, indicative of a loss of faith in the system and the usual way of doing things by the general public.
I think you're right. And I think one thing that's been missing from the conversation so far is the importance of resisting restrictions on protests in other contexts. So it's James Cleverly in the Home Office at the moment, isn't it? Suella Braverman previously, Priti Patel before that, all dedicated to closing down public protest. In fact, that clip of Andrew Marr that you just heard, where the suggestion that MPs should be prevented from meeting with certain groups, that's extraordinary. Former Labour MP as well. That's extraordinary. So resist that sort of thing, but don't maybe fight the wrong battles by demanding the right to protest on someone's doorstep when they're taking away the person inside the house's right to sit down with the group that you're representing. I think it is a lot more nuanced than some of the headlines allow, although I'm not comfortable being on the different side of any argument to Chris Packham, except letting foxes sleep in your bed. It's gone complete partridge today, hasn't it? He did tell me during the full disclosure interview we did together when he was a kid that he would have wild animals in his room. He didn't just keep birds in a shoebox. He'd keep a fox he'd have a fox sleeping in his bed. So there are some things with which I will never agree with Chris Packham, and this may well be one of them. James is in Spalding. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Likewise. Thank you, James. How polite. It'll never catch on.
I just wanted to say I think there's a really good balance of all of the point of views this morning. I think that I don't think people should protest outside people's houses, but I also think that I have a huge amount of empathy for people in that I just don't think politicians listen enough to people anymore. Yes. James Cleverly recently said, you've made your point, but I also think you can say that all you want, but if you're not going to listen to people, if you're not going to get around around the table frequently enough with people that protest, then it's difficult to know kind of what to expect. And you hear all the time politicians say at the moment, this is what the people think, this is what the people think. But if you look at polls and just, George Galloway's recent, re-election, mainly on the point of Gaza, it's increasingly at odds what politicians are saying people think with what people are actually saying. And I think this is the natural consequence of that, is that people don't feel heard. The
frustration is a natural consequence of that, but the frustration doesn't justify the tactic, doesn't justify the action, not least because of that slightly glib point I just made about Jacob Rees-Mogg wandering out of his house and deciding he was realising rather than deciding that he was wrong about Brexit. I think these things make the protesters feel better, but they have no impact whatsoever on the politician, except possibly a hardening of resolve, the likelihood of me changing my mind because you're camped out on my doorstep might actually diminish as a consequence of you being camped out on my doorstep.
Yeah, but then I suppose this is where we get into this vicious cycle, isn't it, where, politicians, refuse to start engaging with people that are, infringing more on them, where people then feel that they're not being heard even more and more, and it just gets into this cycle. So sadly, it will take one thing, but I think it will be having the politicians having to give in and speak more to people, because, the more that people are not heard, the worse and worse it's going to get. And there's a greater force.
Yes. I mean, these are. I don't know if B follows A, but certainly everything you say is accurate, and you can see why. I can see why you might knit them all together. You mentioned George Galloway, of course, which we've been quite careful not to do much on the programme this week. But I did come across one little clip of him that I think might be of interest to those who are. Shall we say? How can we put it politely? To those who are perhaps falling for his shtick at the minute.
We have already, and it's only February, 65,000 people, uncharted, undocumented, unvetted. We've no idea who they are, although we know most of them are men, and most of them are fighting age men at that, who are now being put up in at least 3-star hotels, sometimes a little better even than that, at the expense of the public, potentially forever more. When our forces cannot interdict a single one of the boats bringing illegal migrants or refugee claimants for asylum, we can't know which until their cases are heard, and their cases have a backlog of hundreds of thousands.
I just thought that was interesting because Priti Patel was swinging for him yesterday, and I just thought that she could have made that speech. She could have delivered much of that speech, although I think she'd probably have a better grasp of the numbers, which were complete gibberish. And, of course, the 3-star hotel argument is one of the most dishonest tropes in the whole refugee conversation. Here is a building that used to be a 3-star hotel. We've now turned it into a holding facility for refugees. The facilities that saw that hotel, that ex-hotel, receive 3 stars are no longer in place. I suppose you could say, well, there's still a sign outside, James, at which point you'd have to say, I don't think I can help you, but do be careful to stay away from scissors. So one of the reasons why I think the line between Galloway and Farage is so thin is because they'll say whatever they think the audience they're in front of wants to hear, which is why it was particularly interesting to learn that another prominent politician of the last few years is considering legal action against Nigel Farage at the minute and has indeed instigated the first steps towards that process. I'm not going to tell you who it is until after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 11. It is Jeremy Corbyn that is threatening legal action against Nigel Farage for reasons that are politically very interesting. Because Keir Starmer used Nigel Farage's long history of being criticised for deploying what are often perceived as anti-Semitic dog whistles, and making comments that are at the very least anti-Semitic adjacent. And Starmer used it to put pressure on Sunak at last week's PMQs. It was actually, I didn't realise at the time, I wasn't entirely sure why he'd done it, but it's actually a very, very, very clever wedge issue that Starmer has deployed there, because it's very tricky for Sunak to talk about extremism or to talk about people who sow hate or people who are divisive, while apparently keeping a seat warm for Nigel Farage in the Conservative Party. But for some reason that I haven't quite worked out, although I suspect it's linked to what I've just described, and Farage's lifelong desperation to be taken seriously and to be a key part of the establishment he claims to despise, Farage got really, really rattled by it and attacked Keir Starmer by making comments about Jeremy Corbyn that Jeremy Corbyn clearly considers or currently considers to be actionable. And he took to Twitter yesterday to reveal that he was indeed instructing lawyers on that issue. So, I mean, there is a political scenario, a political stroke legal scenario for which I'm fairly confident you could sell all sorts of tickets. You could sell all manner of tickets. Roll up, roll up, roll up. And just for the avoidance of confusion, no problem at all for me, even though both of them, Farage and Corbyn, both get a chapter in How They Broke Britain. I know exactly whose side I would be on in that battle. And if you don't, you need to pay more attention to the programme. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. I'm going to change tack completely now. We're going to have a conversation that demands certainly no political engagement whatsoever. There's a newish chairman of the BBC. Do you remember why the last one had to go? This again is evidence perhaps of some of the stuff we touched on in the last hour, just how absolutely daft everything has become as a consequence, partly of the B word, but partly of allowing complete delinquents like Boris Johnson and Liz Truss into Downing Street. Everything is in some ways compromised, corrupted, arguably even broken. Do you remember the last chairman of the BBC? Well, it was not only a big mate of Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. I think he used to be Rishi Sunak's boss at Goldman Sachs. And he was working as an advisor in Downing Street during lockdown. That's an amazing thing, that, isn't it? Of all the people in all the world that may have been qualified to advise Rishi Sunak during lockdown, it turns out that his former boss at a merchant bank was the best qualified of them all. And his name was Richard Sharp, and he wanted to be chairman of the BBC. And lo and behold, Boris Johnson made him chairman of the BBC. But what neither of them had disclosed at the time was that Richard Sharp had played a role in facilitating a loan of up to £800,000 that was made to Boris Johnson and guaranteed by a distant cousin that he had, I don't believe, any previous knowledge of. And none of them thought fit to mention that. Thankfully, it got picked up. I think it was probably the Sunday Times. It was probably Harry York and Gabriel Pogrund at the Sunday Times, who seem to be holding the fort for investigative journalism in this country at the moment. And as a consequence of it coming out, he had to resign as chairman of the BBC. So then they had to find a new fella. And lo and behold, they found someone that they quite like the cut of the jib of. And he has come out. His name is Samir Shah. He's come out. Indeed, he's written to all staff at the BBC, telling them that they need to win back working class audiences. Now, he talks about reflecting class and thought in all its diversity. And I haven't got the first idea what he means. I think if you're talking about opinions that are very popular with Billy Bunch of Numbers on Twitter, who's got a bulldog avatar and never uses his and can't spell, then those opinions are more often reflected on Question Time and other BBC programmes than mine are, I think. I mean, certainly Farage being a good example. How many other MEPs can you name, members of the European Parliament, who went on Question Time? Can you name one? So the idea that the discussion programmes where you are more likely to appear if you're a fully paid up member of the Tufton Street incestuous lobbying network than you are if you're a world authority on whatever your academic discipline may be. The idea that though you're not having diversity of thought on the BBC is ridiculous. So, I mean, by all means, challenge that. What would diversity of thought on the BBC look like if it's not there already? The tragedy and the strength of the BBC is that they routinely put people on it who don't just work for organisations that are dedicated to its own destruction, which would include the Conservative Party, but they actually put people on who are themselves dedicated to the BBC's own destruction. The Daily Telegraph columnists, Daily Telegraph, it barely has any readers anymore compared to when my dad worked there. But they pop up on the Question Time panel all the time. If you don't text me to ask why I never go on, it said they do invite me. There's absolutely no problems on that front, and I may change my mind at some point in the future. But at the moment, the risk of who you're going to be sitting next to, you run the risk, if you go on Question Time, of sitting next to someone that you'd cross the road to avoid. I went on, would you believe, say no to most things, but I quite like quiz shows. I agreed to go on Celebrity Pointless, thinking, well, it can't be that bad. It's not as if I'm going to end up sitting next to or standing next to someone who I find truly repellent. And I'm not going to name any names. I'm just going to suggest you can probably find a list of who the other contestants were on the BBC archives. So that's why I don't do it. But the idea that there's no diversity of thought is, I think, absurd. Which brings us to diversity of class. So the new chairman of the BBC, the one who got the job after the last one was found to have had undisclosed connections with an £800,000 loan made to Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister. Boris Johnson, of course, beloved of Conservative MPs who think that if you can't afford to make ends meet on universal credit, then you should try eating sawdust or selling your children for medical research. But he couldn't afford to live on an MP's salary, which is north of 150 grand a year. But hey-ho, double standards away. Talking about showcasing the full range of British culture and talent. I don't know what he means. So I'm going to put up diversity of thought on the list, all right? You can challenge that if you think I'm wrong. If you think there isn't diversity of thought on the BBC, then tell me what you think is missing. Well, there's two questions here, isn't there? You tell me what you think is missing when it comes to diversity of thought on the BBC. And you could also tell me what you think Samir Shah is talking about, because I suspect they are two very different things. What is missing is someone who will routinely respond to a booking from a secretly funded Tufton Street think tank, like the Taxpayers Alliance or the Institute of Economic Affairs. What is missing is a guest on every single programme they appear on asking what the hell they're doing there if they won't disclose their funding. So there's some diversity of thought that you don't see unless they accidentally book George Monbiot. But when it comes to class, I have no idea what he's talking about. Do you? How do you make a programme that would win back working class audiences? I've got a horrible feeling that this is much, much more patronising than programmes that, or rather than attitudes that he would say alienate working class audiences. What on earth is a working class television programme? I don't need any instruction on what a programme that tells working class stories looks like. In fact, the 40th anniversary of the miners' strike starting tomorrow will be a very good example. And BBC Two has been running a series of, frankly, extraordinary documentaries, absolutely brilliant programme making in every way. So a working class drama would be everything from Coronation Street, I mean, most obviously soap operas, but I don't understand what it means. Not just what is a working class programme, 0345 6060 973, but a programme that is designed to win back working class viewers. What on earth is he talking about? Now, I do this, I don't think I do this too often. It's one of the tiny burdens I bear, that if I don't mention my own, quotes, privilege, end quotes, I get a bunch of messages saying, oh, it's all very well for you in your ivory tower. And if I do mention my, quotes, privilege, end quotes, I get a bunch of messages saying, why do you keep banging on about your privilege? But I think I should mention it. I am clearly not working class, although my background isn't quite as privileged or as rarefied as a lot of people who end up going to a school like the one I went to or doing the job that I do now. But what the hell does he mean, this chairman of the BBC, when he talks about the need to win back working class audiences? What would that, I mean, does that mean anything to you? 0345 6060 973. The reason I like this as a topic is because I think it highlights something that the Tories have tried to do in recent years without as much success as they probably expected. They tried to portray someone like 30p Lee Anderson as being a representative of the working class, when he's nothing of the sort. He's a representative of not very bright people with extremely strong opinions. And there are loads of them in every social class. If he spoke with a posher accent and was possessed of exactly the same opinions, people who think Jacob Rees-Mogg is a genius would think that 30p Lee Anderson is a genius. They're both, to use a technical term, as thick as mince. So I've got a horrible feeling that people like Samir Shah, when they use the phrase working class, just mean thick as mince, which is about as far away from reality and as far away from the truth as it would be possible to get. So, what's he talking about? Topics like this don't always work. I've got to be honest with you, because I could fill the switchboard now by saying, what's a working class programme? And you'd ring in and someone would say Alf Garnett, and someone else would say Bullseye, and someone would say EastEnders, and someone would say Fred Dibner. And it would be mildly interesting for about 5 minutes. But the phones would be ringing off the hook. This is a completely different question, much more nuanced, much more complicated, and therefore much more interesting. When a senior Tory-friendly BBC chairman says that we need to win back working class viewers, what do you think he is talking about? Yeah, Benjamin proves my point. Jeremy Kyle. I genuinely don't know. What is a programme that is likely to appeal to a, quotes, working class viewer, end quotes, but not, for example, appeal to me? And vice versa. What is a programme that might appeal to a middle-class viewer, but not appeal to whoever it is that these people have in mind when they talk about working-class viewers? 16 minutes after 11 is the time. Help me out with this one. Because, I mean, the worst-case scenario is that he is talking absolute gibberish and nobody's got a Scooby-Doo what kind of thing he has in mind when he talks about programmes that might woo back the working classes. But in some ways, I want you to explain that to me as well. Because it gets reported straight, this stuff, in newspapers that are largely written by people from my social class. Chairman of the BBC comes out, thinks he's going to win brownie points by saying, we need to win back working-class audiences. If you're nodding in agreement, and you don't normally ring in because you think we'll probably end up having a scrap, you're probably right. But if you are nodding in agreement to this, just take a moment out of your morning to tell me what you are thinking. What on earth is a programme that woos a working-class audience? Because I could be blind to this issue. I could be completely insulated from it. I could be an absolute victim of my own prejudices, privileges, presumptions, call them what you will. But I'm going to say to you, I don't think there is such a thing as programmes for the working class. I just don't think it exists as a genre. I don't think there's a programme that I would only enjoy if I'd had a humbler upbringing or a more difficult upbringing. The idea that story... I mean, what's Charles Dickens? Does Charles Dickens appeal to the working class? Does William Shakespeare appeal to the working class? What's Samir Shah got in mind? Sounds to me like... Just as it's impossible to really define what woke means if you're using it as a pejorative, people trying to be anti-woke end up speaking utter bilge. I'm trying to think who the best caller is this hour. Yeah, you are allowed to agree with me. I should make that clear. So you think of yourself as working class. We may not get into the weeds of what that actually means. So you think of yourself as working class. Would you tell me what you think about the idea that there are programs that would appeal very specifically and directly to you because of your class? All right, so I'm watching a bit of One Day on Netflix at the moment. And that doesn't just appeal to my class, it is about me. It's about my generation. It's about a graduate class of society who went to university in the early 90s when rave culture was kicking off and everybody wanted to get a job in the media. It's frankly ridiculous how well David Nichols knows the world in which I moved. But One Day is enjoyable for other people as well. And what else am I absolutely loving at the moment? I'm loving Slow Horses, which is espionage, and I'm loving The Tourist, which is about a bloke who loses his memory in the outback and has links to Irish criminal family back in Ireland. I mean, so what is it? So you think, let's do it that way round. The Royal Family, Royle, one of the best television programmes ever made. Do you have to be like the Royal Family to enjoy it? Do you have to live in a house like the ones that Jim Royle and his family? Of course. What on earth does this mean? So you are working class. Tell me what you think about the idea that there are programmes that can be made, that are made, that used to be made, which would appeal very directly and almost exclusively to you. 0345 6060 973. Because I've got a feeling this is actually a bit worse than we realise. I've got a feeling that when an executive, a Tory-friendly BBC executive comes out and says we need to make more working class programmes, I've got a feeling that either they haven't got the first idea what they're talking about, but they very patronisingly believe that this will somehow appeal to people who don't like thinking about things, or they're talking about something much worse, which is we've got to start reflecting the kind of prejudices that 30p Lee spouts on a regular basis and represents, and they're no more working class than Jacob Rees-Mogg is upper class. So give me a call on this. I think it should be interesting, but frankly, it's up to you. 20 minutes after 11 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
I love this. Mark's been in touch. Says, as a working class man from the north, James, I'd love to see more programmes about whippets, racing pigeons and beef dripping. I mean, I know you're joking, but I don't know what the chairman of the BBC is talking about when he says that they need to do more to win back working class audiences, unless in his mind you're not being funny, Mark. You're being literal. Actually, while we're at it, perhaps we could include the question of what would a programme designed to appeal exclusively to working class viewers look like? And I mean, you can't really say Jeremy Kyle, A, because that was on ITV, and B, because it's not on the telly anymore, and C, because I think people viewed it like they viewed pornography, didn't they? Like a sort of poverty pornography. A lot of people tuned in who would be from a completely different socio-economic class to the people who appeared on the programme, for the same reasons that people sort of slowed down for road traffic accidents or turned up at the Colosseum to watch some Christians being eaten by lions. I could be wrong, but I'm genuinely baffled. Simon is, I don't know how to pronounce that, Confolin?
Confalon
en France.
Morning, James.
Well,
Morning,
you're not working class, you live in France.
Listen, I've worked more here than I have before in the UK, I can tell you. Anyway,
What's he on about? This...
You've stolen my point, because part is about Jeremy Kyle, or that type of programme.
Yes.
Where I think that they appeal to that base level of people who they perceive to be working class for a start.
So it's an incredibly snobbish thing to say, then. We need to win back working class audiences.
But the real story is the Red Wall, Lee Anderson, those people who actually are homophobic but won't admit it, the ones that are sexist.
Well, hang on, you can't say... There's a little bit close there to lumping Lee Anderson in with the comment about homophobia, which I know wasn't your intention, but for the avoidance of doubt and for absolute clarity, that you're offering up those as two separate constituencies.
Absolutely correct. But basically, it's those people who are perceived to be working class who actually, a point that's never really raised very much, is the big fear I have for reform getting in any sort of power is those working class votes. They're just the people that Trump manages to woo, who believe he is their saviour, even though he wouldn't, shall we say...
if they were on fire. Yes.
Correct.
So rhetorically, I get that, but he's the chairman of the BBC. He's not making a speech on the stump in Ashfield. He is presumably coming from a place where, I think he used to be a BBC executive, so he's middle class all day long. He thinks there are programmes that are working class programmes. What would he have in mind?
They want to try and, I don't know, they want to rehash something to go against what they perceive to be the left-wing liberal...
So he means anti-woke. He means anti-woke. Is it,
absolutely.
So we're looking at... Why aren't there more right-wing comics on the telly? Question. Answer, because they're not very funny, usually.
Correct.
Not always, some are, but, generally speaking, they're not very funny, and therefore they're not on telly as much as the ones who are funny, who happen more often than not to lean a little bit towards the liberal. So I'm trying to think what an anti-woke drama would look like. I suppose it's the ones where the baddies win, is it?
Maybe.
So you don't know. None of us have got a clue.
Get back to my rendering anyway.
Yeah, well, crack on. Good luck with it, Simon. There you go. Actually doing literal, proper hard work, proper manual labour, while speaking to us about class issues on the radio. Listen. Sometimes the absence of an answer is the answer in itself, but I'm naive enough to think that the chairman of the BBC must have something in mind when he talks about programmes that could win back a working class audience. But what I don't have is a meaningful idea of what that would be, except the really patronising idea that he thinks they want more. We must have more programmes about whippets. We must have more programmes about, I don't know, if it was America, it'd be chewing tobacco. What is it? So you name a working class programme and I will almost certainly say, I love that, and I'm middle class. Mrs. Brown's Boys is getting quite a few mentions in my inbox. Well, listen, I say a lot of controversial things on this programme and I'm always happy to deal with the consequences. I think it's brilliant. I love Mrs. Brown's Boys. Don't at me. I think it's got a real end of pier feel to it. It's got a real variety show vibe to it. Maybe that's what he means. He means that there's very few places in the country now where you can see an end of pier show. The last one I went to was in Cromer. But, the kind of world that gave us the Les Dennises of this world, or the Dustin G's, the Les Dawsons. You don't have that word, but there's a reason why that doesn't provide a conveyor belt of talent anymore. It's because the venues don't exist. I don't know what he means. Martin's in Teignmouth. Martin, to you.
No, I don't know what he means either, but I just think that it's not about working class or not working class. It's just simply about entertainment, and perhaps they need to have more entertaining programs.
Teignmouth.
Correct.
Sorry. Yes. Carry on.
It's just about whether they should have more entertaining programs, rather than calling it working class or non-working class. And the best program that's been on for a long while was the was the post office one that I saw that was on ITV.
Yeah, it was absolutely brilliant, and arguably precisely the sort of thing that the BBC should have been making.
And lacking in doing, and I wonder why that is. And I think I do wonder sometimes whether there's a desire not to educate the masses, but just to entertain them. If you entertain them as they did in Roman times rather than educate them, you're onto a good thing, aren't you, if you're in charge?
You're talking about bread and circuses, aren't you?
Yeah.
There it is. So, listen, in the absence of anything else, and he hasn't explained himself very well in the reports that I've seen, we're going to conclude he just means we need to throw the plebs more bread and give them the odd circus so they don't start really biting chunks out of the people who made me chairman of the BBC after the last fella had to resign because he hadn't come clean about his role in the £800,000 loan arranged for Boris Johnson.
As usual, James, you put it much more succinctly than I should have done.
Yeah, well, you gave me the bricks with which to build it, Martin. You gave me the bricks with which to build it. So that, well, what else does he mean if not a kind of uptick in the Jeremy Kyle type programming, or we'll just keep them entertained, not in full? What does he mean when he talks about anybody who thinks, as Rishi Sunak clearly did, that Lee Anderson is representative of working class values, probably thinks that Jeremy Kyle is representative of working class entertainment. And that's not only patronising, I would say, as a fully paid up member of the middle classes, I would say that was profoundly and quite horribly insulting. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
Strong from Paul. I don't think there is working class TV, James. My working class parents would happily watch a Dennis Potter play on a Sunday night after surprise, surprise. Maybe more working class representation in the media would prevent the idea that working class TV equals reality shows. I mean, more diversity in the corporation, more diversity in programme making. Problem with that, of course, is if the 14 years of Tory rule making social mobility almost move into reverse. Something oddly, I know what you're going to say when I say this is a subject I know a bit about. You're going to say, well, it's the first time for everything, James. But I'm the trustee of a charity that seeks to help young people from backgrounds very different from mine into the media. It's a charity we set up in the memory of one of my best friends who we lost during lockdown, not to COVID, but that obviously denuded the funeral of some of the meaning and ceremony it would otherwise have had. But he was a lad from Rochdale who ended up in the media by dint of being a bloody genius and realised that he was knocking around with Herberts like me instead of anybody pretty much who came from backgrounds like his. So in his memory, and because he asked us to, we've set up a charity to try to redress that balance. And the imbalance is epic. But how that would reflect on screen, I don't know, to be honest with you. The young people, I have to stop myself saying kids because it's so patronising, but the young people who we've helped get into positions or get work experience or get breaks, if they ended up running the BBC, I don't know that they would make programmes different from the ones that are currently being made. And that, I think, is because I don't know what a working programme looks like. Steve's been in touch. He describes himself as an extremely frustrated television producer, and you'll see why. Morning, James. What does working class television look like? That loud slapping sound you can hear is all the BBC commissioners simultaneously face palming because as sure as God made little apples, they won't have a clue either. Yes, and thank you for your kind words about the show. Similarly, Lee, who I don't think is being sarcastic, so they should just broadcast your radio show, James. I like to think this is a classless place. Not as in that it has no class, but as in it doesn't lend itself to any particular socio-economic sector. Tristan is in Greenwich. Tristan, what would you like? I mean, oddly, I should, in the interest of full disclosure, I would normally and completely unfairly use your name as an example of the kind of name likely to pop up at the BBC in a commissioning role from someone who is violently divorced from the working class. So I'd like to apologise retrospectively for that and ask you why you rang in today, Tristan.
Just for that reason. So I am working class from Lincolnshire originally. You name it, I am as working class as they come.
Right.
And that's the problem. I don't think people know what it means. I mean,
yes.
Politicians use it all the time. Alarm clock. They don't necessarily know what it means. And then with the BBC and other TV shows, they kind of confuse benefit class and working class.
Oh, Lordy, I hadn't thought of that. God, well, that's
And
even
then-
more insulting in a way, isn't it?
And also, it is offence to the BBC, but if there's ever a controversial message, like in EastEnders or whatever, they always give it to the white working class person.
What do you mean by controversial? I haven't watched EastEnders for a while.
Okay, so there's a character called Karen who's white, working class, works in a laundrette, etc., loads of kids, and she's seen as sort of down and out. But whenever they have a little chat about Brexit or immigration or anything else, she's always made to look like the silly one, and they all sort of patronise her for like having white working class. So she represents the whole of white working class people.
And that's problematic because, well, A, Jacob Rees-Mogg is all of the things that you've just attributed to Karen, except the low income, and B, because that creates the, well, EastEnders is a tricky example, isn't it? But the idea that middle class people think that everybody like her holds the views that she has, when actually the opposite is true. But conservative politicians and possibly this BBC chairman think that views like that aren't being articulated enough, and that they are. So both sides think that she is representative of a class when really she's just representative of a position.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. What would a programme look like then that was specifically likely to or designed to appeal to people from your self-described perspective? Is there such a thing?
No, there isn't, and that's the thing, because there's a group. I mean, you're as I always think, let's say about class, but it's environment, family, social, economic background is more than colour or diversity. It's more diversity of thought, really.
And is there a lack of diversity of thought on the BBC at the moment? Bearing in mind...
Yeah, I think so.
Go on, what sort of thoughts aren't properly represented?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I don't really want to go down a rabbit hole, but...
Well, I mean, I don't want to turn this into that conversation on Sky News when the culture minister couldn't name anything that proved the BBC was biased. But and I don't want to monster you either, but I completely disagree with you. I can't think of a thought that I haven't seen spouted on Question Time, whether it's representative of any class or position or not. I can't. I mean, you must be able to think of one light, loose example of a thought.
Yeah, I'll give you a loose example. Yeah, Question Time. You know, some of the audience in Question Time believe a certain thing, but it's that kind of shy Tory peer pressure of they don't want to say it. So then they'll say, we selected a group of people that represent all views, and then they'll say, who agrees with, I don't know, we'll say Brexit. Yeah. And nobody puts their hands up and they go, see, nobody agrees with it.
But they did.
See people twitching, but no, there's people in the audience twitching, but they look around and think, I do not want to be the person that gets clipped as being...
5 years ago, they all put their hands up.
Yeah, but now it's like they don't want to be seen as the gammon or the person with a right-wing view or the extreme left view. So a lot of people now...
You don't think they might have changed their minds?
Well, not everybody has, obviously, but when you see those questions and nobody...
the audience is deliberately chosen to reflect the result of the last general election, don't you?
Yeah, and a mix of when they ask them to be in the audience, they ask them. But what I'm saying is you can see there's certain questions where they'll go, put your hand up, and it'd be slightly controversial. And there's got to be at least one person that agrees with it because they're twitching, but they won't put their hands up.
So how would you fix that then?
I don't think you could. You'd have to change the format of it.
To do what? To
maybe have some anonymous.
Because I mean, I think you're spectacularly wrong about this, but I don't want to fall out. So you see an audience on Question Time, and you're convinced that they actually agree with you, but they're too frightened to put their hands up.
At times, yeah.
Okay. I suspect
when they do,
maybe everybody thinks that, Tristan.
No, when they do polls, like let's say the death penalty, they'll do a poll and around 60-65% will probably say yes, they agree with the death penalty. Yeah. Then they'll say in the audience, who agrees with the death penalty? And nobody put their hands up. And you just think, they don't want to be that one that gets clipped up on Twitter as being the gammon or the
There may be
extreme.
some truth in that. It could also be that the kind of people who want to bring back the death penalty are not the kind of people who routinely apply to be in the Question Time audience.
True, and that's the same with the BBC.
You can't just say true and glibly move on. I've just given you a reason why perhaps your theory is completely crackers.
No, watch it next time there's a controversial question and see the audience twitch.
All right, I'm looking for twitching members of the audience, and if I see anyone twitching, I'll know that they agree with Tristan.
Thank you.
The patron saint of twitchers. Mind how you go. It's 11:42. Gary's in Finchley. Gary, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So
Hang on, I'm just trying to tell if you're twitching or not. Are you twitching or not? Are you going to tell me what you really think, or are you twitching, thinking that they'll clip this up and go blooming viral? I'm not going to say what I really think because I don't want to go viral. Go on. What did you ring in to say?
No. I'm definitely going to tell you what I really think. So, first of all, I work partly in the TV industry as a writer, director, and producer.
Okay.
So that's my background. So, what I think they are trying to do, I mean, can we talk about some very, very good programs?
Yes.
That appeal across the board.
Yes.
The 1% Club is absolutely brilliant television.
Is that the Lee Mack quiz show?
Yes.
Yeah, that's well, anything, mate. I could watch Lee Mack read the phone book, to be honest with you, but it is also a brilliant format. You're quite right. It is a brilliant format, and it works across all classes, all ages, all representative. It just works. Right? Yes.
It's brilliant. Then you've got other programs. So you've got programs, the very successful BBC programs like Normal People, which was a huge hit and worked across all classes. And even though it was very much a sort of middle-classy students in Ireland kind of thing, it seemed to be incredibly popular across the board.
Yes.
So what I think we're doing is what we need to do, what the BBC needs to do, is say we want to make good programs. That's the ambition, is to make good TV. Not to make programs specifically for the working class or the middle class. But there is a thing that, like Ofcom, which is a regulator, has this regulation in it that it says you have to make a certain number of programs in Wales, you have to make a certain number of programs in Manchester. I basically say, if you've got good comedy and it's all coming from the Mancunians, I'm from Manchester, James, maybe I should use something else.
So I don't know if we can quite do this. I think I can see where you're going. If all the funny people are in Manchester, then make all the comedies there.
Exactly. And if all the funny people in London, who cares where they come from?
You know what the answer to that is. Geographic quotas. So, having the massive programme making potential now in Salford has changed the game, albeit it involved in the first instance a lot of people having to uproot from a lot of people commuting actually to present programmes in Salford and then come back to their homes in London later or at weekends. But I do quite like the idea of a national treasure, a national institution like the BBC actively trying to break down geographical barriers. The same with Channel 4 in Leeds. I disagree with you a bit on that.
If we take something like the post office drama, right? That was an astonishing thing, and it took the country by storm.
Yes.
And I wonder what would have happened if that programme had been on Channel 4 or had been on the BBC. Would there have been a different reaction from the public? Because it was on ITV, which is seen as being a more working class or totally inclusive kind of thing, as opposed to if it had been out on BBC 2, it might have had an entirely different reaction and might have sunk without a trace.
God.
And I think this also applies to comedy. So in my world, which is the comedy world, if you look at the top comedy in any broadcast, well, they announce like what the top comedy is each week in broadcast magazines. And the top one is nearly always Lee Mack with Not Going Out, right? And it gets like 1 million viewers.
Is it?
And then the one that's like 2 or 3 down, I promise you, is like Dad's Army. Repeat of Dad's Army.
Well, they wouldn't keep repeating them if they weren't popular. But so what does that tell us?
No, but they're only getting 300,000 viewers. It's actually not popular.
I see what you mean.
Broadcasters are actually failing to unite the country. And that is if that is the intention, to unite the country, then they need to work harder. It's not about working class. It's about mass appeal, making stuff that actually appeals across all boundaries to all religions.
But historically, all great art wouldn't it? Apart from some sort of avant-garde stuff, particularly in the arena of performance art like acting, all the great stuff historically would appeal right across from the groundlings to the monarchy, wouldn't it? Not to put too fine a point on it.
If you take something like Fawlty Towers, which is still regarded as like one of the top comedy programs of all time,
yes,
it's not a working class program. The idea that working class people don't find it funny, or upper class people don't find it funny, is ridiculous. It would be
absurd. Have you ever watched Brassic?
No.
Let me recommend that to you, because I mean, Brassic is, I think, one of the funniest things I've ever seen on television, and it is set very much in, I suppose, like Shameless was as well. These are programs set in working class communities without making a mockery of the main characters or the class of the main characters. But I can't imagine anybody turning that off because it was too, quotes, working class, end quotes. Give it a whirl, Gary. Thank you for your call. 11:47 is the time. James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC. It is 11:52. I'm going to read this from Alan in Hitchin, because all human life is here. But I'm not sure that this was the case, Alan. I think when Samir Shah says the BBC should make more programmes for the working class, it's a euphemism for more racially diverse programmes. He probably wants to say the BBC should make more programmes for those with names like his or other ethnic minorities, but that would be too controversial, so he's using what he thinks is a passable synonym for the same. I think the exact opposite, Alan, bizarrely. I don't think there would be any out. I mean, maybe the Daily Mail would get upset about it, or Nigel Farage, but if the chairman of the BBC came out and said we need to see much more representation of ethnic minorities or LGBT communities on our screens, I don't know that the criticism would come from anywhere except the usual places. I think he's trying to appeal to the people who would criticise him if he did say that. I could be wrong, but remember who put him into the job at the BBC. It's the kind of political class of the last few years. Maybe. I just think that would be unlikely, not least because nearly half of British viewers last time they were asked said they thought that ethnic minorities and LGBT communities were over-represented on television, and the people to whom the current iteration of the party seems to be desperate to appeal are the kind of people who would say that they thought that the ethnic minority population was overrepresented on telly. Just 26% versus 45% saying that they're underrepresented. That's a YouGov poll from March of last year. 11:54 is the time. 0345 6060. Well, I don't know why I'm giving you the number. We're going to run out of time in a minute. Sophie's in Edinburgh. Sophie, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello, Sophie.
I called in because actually I think this is indicative of a kind of really wide misunderstanding of what working class even means, because so I'm from a village just outside Wolverhampton originally, but I'm now at the University of Edinburgh.
Right.
And my university has 63% of my university were privately educated.
Gosh.
Just to put that in some context,
yes.
97% of students in the UK are state school educated. So
I nearly mansplained then. I said I think it's a bit lower than that, but you've checked and I haven't, so I'll shut up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm part of the 97 Club, and also I'm the State Educated Students Officer for the Classic Society at university.
Yes.
So
you've done your research then, and I haven't, so I'll stay even doubly quiet. Go on.
This is something that really means a lot to me, because I think fundamentally the reason I picked up the phone is that there's no such thing as a working class programme, because the TV shows that you listed just towards the start, Slow Horses especially, they are some of my favourite TV shows, and we are from different backgrounds. There's no such thing as a divide in that sense at all. I actually think that what he means by working class programming is, and I'm not even disparaging this, by the way, but programs that aren't, intellectually stimulating, things like Jeremy Kyle, and I don't think that's something that's reserved for the working class, because I don't think that anything really is reserved for any class. I mean, like you've been saying this whole time, Faulty Towers, that's not portraying the working class. I don't think it's got anything to do with the content of the show so much as the people that he would associate with that level of intellect, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, of course it does. So there is a snobbery here. It is, because, I mean, the idea that he was he's either talking gibberish or he's speaking to quite an unpleasant prejudice. You're nodding towards the second conclusion, that he thinks that a working class programme would be the televisual equivalent of junk food.
To be completely frank with you, I'm in my third year at uni now. I'm studying classics, which to my chagrin is the same as what Boris Johnson studied at university. And it's one that's very, very rooted in kind of an elite background.
Yes, that's true.
And
I mean, it shouldn't be. That's just because they don't teach it in state schools, really. And well, you know more about this than I do. But
they really should, and that's something I feel very passionately about.
Yes.
But I think that over these years at university, the main thing that I've kind of come to conclude is that working class amongst people who aren't often becomes a synonym for sick.
And that is what we think is probably being appealed to here. And it's partly why they made Lee Anderson deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, because if you are from a background like mine and unlucky enough to have had key influences and friends and family members over the years from very different backgrounds, you could end up thinking that Lee Anderson is representative of anybody other than Lee Anderson.
Exactly. I mean, Lee Anderson stands for absolutely nothing that I stand for at all, and yet it's made out that he's a representative of me and my family and the people from my background, and that's not fair.
So we think that Samir Shah is somehow dreaming of the televisual equivalent of 30p Lee. Whatever he would look like in TV form is the programme that Samir Shah is dreaming of. That's a terrifying thought. Terrifying thought. How did you end up doing classics? Were you just lucky that the school you went to did it, or did you seek it out yourself?
Very lucky. It just so happened that one of my teachers at my high school had a degree in, I think, classics or ancient history, something like that. And I was in the first year that or maybe the second year, that she managed to put on an ancient history GCSE for just one class in the year. I was lucky enough to get put into that class when I requested it. And then, yes, I ended up here.
Life-changing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm very, very lucky to have had her. So shout out to Miss Taylor.
Yes, indeed. A shout out to Miss Taylor. Take care, Sophie. Thank you. I think that covers it fairly clearly. Of course, Samir Shah may have meant something completely different. I'm told he went to... I don't know, it mattered, but he went to Latimer Upper School in West London, no hostages tells me, and then attended St Catherine's College, Oxford. So picking up on Alan in Hitchin's point, no hostages asked, is that what Alan meant when he said that he thought Shah wanted to make more shows for and about people like him? I don't know. You'd have to ask Alan. It's coming up to 12 noon. A bit torn on what to do next. There's quite a few stories around. The one that I'm drawn to for similar reasons to the conversation we've just had is about, what would you call them, terms of endearment they would have been once, but they are not anymore, and whether or not calling particularly young women things like sweet or cute stifles their creativity. I think I'm going to need another crash course.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Turn your attention. I don't know if you've seen this story about the granddad who left 50 quid to each of his granddaughters because he didn't feel that they'd paid him enough attention. It makes him sound bad, actually. I read this story and ended up feeling sorry for the granddad. I thought I was going to feel sorry for the granddaughters. I might tell you a little bit more about that. And we should probably have a little look at what happened in the House of Lords yesterday with regard to that Rwanda bill. Ken Clarke, that veteran lefty, that well-known Marxist firebrand, former Conservative Chancellor Ken Clarke. Radio can be a bit like social media, can't it? I feel I should put an emoji after say, because I don't want to get text saying, you really think, I would do as well, I would get a text, do you really think Ken Clarke was a Marxist firebrand? It shows what you know about politics, you ridiculous lemon. I will get a text, so don't send me that text now just because you think it's funny to send it, like where the humour goes meta. But that well-known Marxist firebrand, former Conservative Chancellor Ken Clarke should just work as sarcasm, shouldn't it? If I say Anyway, he was particularly brilliant in the House of Lords yesterday on the question of why on earth any sovereign British government would seek to ignore both reality and international law. But it was just the 5 defeats that Piers inflicted on that bill last night. The United Nations, who have been quoted today approvingly by people who normally disapprove of them, saying things like the Rwanda scheme is a violation of international law, reiterated their position last night. I like these sort of stories. Girls are less inspired to be creative than boys are because they are more likely to be called sweet or cute instead of cool or brave. Now, bear with me on this. It's an interesting study. Girls as young as 5 are reported to have been essentially stifled. You do something as a girl and you're going to be called sweet or beautiful or cute. You do it as a boy and you could be called brave or cool or innovative. The research has been undertaken by, or rather for Lego across 36 countries, because I imagine part of the process here is trying to work out why boys would be more drawn to Lego historically than girls would be. And the biased language is what they found, reinforces traditional gender roles. Now, just stop for a minute if your eyes are rolling. If your eyes are rolling at something like this, I'm on a mission to help you. I think we did it last week with the nights where a London theatre was going to try to encourage an exclusively black identifying audience because the play is about slavery. And as we proved, I think, close to perfectly, thanks to the calls that we took, that's a really good idea that no one needs to get upset about, particularly when the number of nights upon which that will happen will be a tiny percentage of the number of nights upon which the play is on. But I do, and when I say I'm reaching out to you if you're rolling your eyes, I understand the knee-jerk reaction to change when the subliminal message behind that change is that there was something wrong with the way we used to do things. What were we talking about yesterday when I recalled the women of a certain age who used to ring me to tell me that they used to like having their bottoms pinched in the office in the 50s or the 60s, even the 70s, because they took it as a compliment. It came up in context, didn't it, on a slightly different phone-in, but it was an example. And what I realised, speaking to those women, and going back a few years now, but they were lovely women, but what I realised was that you're almost self-therapizing. You're almost convincing yourself that wasn't a violation, because the alternative is nastier, it's uglier. The alternative is annoying. So I did it with corporal punishment, of all things. I spent years arguing that there was nothing wrong with corporal punishment because it hadn't done me any harm. Because the alternative to that would be to admit that it had done me harm, and that in some ways, psychologically, it continued to do me harm. So it's like a sort of weird suit of armor that you strap on in order to protect yourself from the genuine consequences of something you've endured. I've told you before, you could have a PE teacher who'd say something, it's only pain, it doesn't really hurt, and you'd sort of go along with it. But of course it hurts, it's blooming pain, it's called pain for a reason. So quite often, one of the things that I really, probably the biggest things I learned in therapy was the importance of recognizing the hurt that you suffered when you were little, because you'd put so much effort into persuading yourself that you hadn't. I also think, and I haven't plugged a book for a while, but my last book, the one before the one that's currently in bookshops, my last one, How Not to Be Wrong, was all about this. The one that came out during lockdown. Little word of advice for you if you're thinking of publishing a book. Try not to publish it when the bookshops are shut. It's just a suboptimal state of affairs. But that was trying to draw lines between what I've just described to you and how we ended up being led through COVID by people who were still very, very much emotionally crippled by the kind of experiences I've just described. That British public school stiff upper lip, the worst possible, the worst imaginable approach to life that you could have if you were trying to steer a country through a pandemic. So look what Boris Johnson did. What did Boris Johnson do? He denied it. He claimed that we'd be absolutely fine if we let it run through as like a dose of salts. Everything he did was like textbook emotionally crippled public school boy who has spent their whole life convincing themselves that they haven't been harmed at all by their childhood experiences, whether at home or at school, or at the kind of school that we both went to. So I mention that simply because I have a huge belief in the liberating power of recognizing that just because we used to do things like that when we were young doesn't mean that we should still be doing things like that now. I mean, look, the stupid examples would involve sending kids up chimneys, but that's why you're rolling your eyes. I think it is. We're working out. But that's why you're rolling your eyes. You're thinking, well, I was called cute. I was called sweet. How dare anyone suggest that anyone was doing me harm when I was called cute? Or so I call girls sweet. I call girls cute. How dare anyone suggest that I'm doing... No one is suggesting you're a wrong 'un. No one is suggesting that you're bad. No one is suggesting for a minute that you are a force for evil. Just as if you were on the receiving end of this stuff and you think that it's ridiculous to suggest that there was anything wrong with it, then no one is sort of casting you as a victim or as a broken reed who's being cruelly abused by society. We're just saying that maybe there's something in the idea that how you phrase things, biased language, will reinforce traditional gender roles. And I buy it. I don't know it. And I hope that with my daughters would probably tell me off, actually, if I used words like sweet and cute instead of cool or brave. But I do think there must be a reason why the findings of this survey support the notion that biased language really drives home traditional gender roles. So if you want to play with Lego, and it is Lego that have conducted the research, you will almost end up talking yourself out of it by dint of the language that's deployed around it. It's not about mum or dad or teachers saying, oh, no, that's for the boys. And that, well, it might be about that. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth. It's about systemic inequalities. It's about limiting creativity. Telling girls that the stuff they're good at is not the stuff that is traditionally male-dominated, whereas in fact every girl deserves the freedom to explore her creativity without fear or pressure. So what I need from you is examples. What I need from you is the proof of the pudding, because it's quite well written in the Times, but it's not written quite well enough for me to understand the story implicitly. You are less likely to be called brave or genius, and therefore you are less likely to have your creativity nurtured. You've got about 90% of females believing that their confidence would be boosted if adults focus less on results and more on complementing the creative process. So what does that look like? What does that look like? What is biased language? Look, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Just because I've got daughters doesn't mean I've been on a Damascene journey. I think I'm a heck of a lot better than perhaps my dad would have been. But we're both coming from a desire to be the best people we can be. The world has changed. So what would be an example for you as a woman of biased language reinforcing traditional gender roles? And you can go back as far as you want, or you can tell me about how your daughter was treated. Just the way in which we use words, sending messages to girls and young women in particular, that certain paths are not for them. Sophie just did it brilliantly in Edinburgh on class-based conversation. The idea that studying classics, going to Edinburgh University, is an avenue that is closed to people from backgrounds like hers, and it was the intervention of one visionary teacher. We were going to give her a shout. I've forgotten her name. Was it Miss Potts? I can't remember. But it was the intervention of one visionary teacher that knocked those barriers down for her. I want to do it from the gender point of view. I want to know what it's like. I want to know what it does. Because some men who reach for words like cute or sweet, and some women who reach for words like cute or sweet, think that they're doing a good thing. They think that they're playing a compliment. But it does something subconsciously to a young woman, and what it does is shut doors. How many times have I said to you, it's about doors? It's about not just having lots of doors in front of you, but being able to see the doors in front of you. It's where that phrase, you can't be what you can't see, comes from. Money buys you doors, it buys you options. It might not buy you happiness, but it buys you options. The talk about diversity in the last hour, depending on the class that you belong to, you'll have more doors if you come from a middle class than you will if you come from the working class. You'll be more aware of avenues that are open to you. Your school will be geared towards showing you things that other schools will not be geared towards showing you. So here's what I want, okay? I just want to know what role biased language plays in real lives. And we'll start with yours, all right? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And I think it's gonna need to be women to start with, which means I'll get 30 men queuing up to contribute to the conversation, which kind of proves the point. If I was feeling really ambitious, I'd wonder whether this also plays a role in the fact that we get more calls from men on most subjects than we do from women, is whether or not it's tied into something similar. This is more of a blokey thing to do than I don't know. We don't need to go there. I want you to tell me how the choice of words actually dilutes female confidence in their own ideas and in their own creativity. Have I explained this all? Well, there's only one way to find out. If I haven't explained it very well, you can do a better job than me of explaining it. That's almost the point of the topic. But no one's ever going to call me cute or sweet. No one's ever going to get to the end of one of these interminable monologues and go, oh, James has been very cute today. That's really sweet. That's just not going to happen. And I think that's partly because I'm a man. You get to the end of one of these monologues and you'll say, God, that was brave, or that was brilliant, or that was cool, or that was rubbish. So I know there's something here. I can't quite get my hands on it. I want you to tell me what it is. It's about the relationship between language and expectation. And you know what I'm talking about because you've lived it. And I don't because I haven't. But by 1 o'clock today, I really want to.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
And cue the queue of texters, almost exclusively male, complimenting me on how cute my last monologue was. But you take my point. That's not language you would use to describe a man. Guess which phrase has already popped up more than any other in my inbox? From women telling me why they particularly hate a phrase. Okay, what do you think the phrase is? We're talking about how biased language enforces gender stereotypes. The phrase is grow a pair. You've got to grow a pair. It automatically implies that only men can solve certain types of problems. I've also been educated in the notion of stereotype threat. This is Mike who tells us about a book called Whistling Vivaldi by Claude Steele. You look at how female mathematicians were given a test, and one group of females were told men generally do better at maths. The other group were told that in general men and women perform similarly on this test, and the second group did better than the first group. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, or in this case, the correct term would be stereotype threat. You've also pointed out in an unsigned text that I didn't need to do a long monologue on that one. I could have just said, here's a story, here are the details, I don't quite get it, could someone explain? You're absolutely right, I could have done that. Wouldn't have been as cute, though. So that's what I mean. I know this is true, and I've read the story, but I can't. Well, I'll tell you what the story needed, and I took the example from the Times. It really needed case studies. Rather than just saying biased language reinforces traditional gender roles, I wanted you to say, if you do this to a girl, she will end up doing that. And that would be a diminishment of ambition or believing that certain paths are not for her. So you tell me what this story is about. Mia is in Exeter. Mia, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I'd like to say I've been with my partner 14 years. He's military.
Right.
And occasionally, about 2-3 times a year, he goes, oh, cutie, and like pats my bum. And inside my belly, there's like this, excuse me, I'm not going to swear. I won't swear, don't worry.
Don't swear.
I won't. There's like a rage of, please, and I've asked him, please don't call me cutie. I'm 58.
Yes.
I'm not cutie. Even you shouldn't really say it to a 16-year-old anyway, but it's like, know your place, stay cute, wear a dress, then I'm happy.
Yeah.
And if you come off those rails, if you come off that, then he's not going to be happy. So know your place. Be a cutie.
So they're minimising. It's a minimising description, a diminishing description.
It just makes me. I mean, I don't feel I am cute. I have my good days and I have my bad days.
But
look in the mirror and go, "Oh my God!"
But if I was being him, today, I'd say, "Well, I think you are."
I'm what?
Well, I'm being him now. I mean, I think you're looking lovely today, and but you don't think.
Use that word then. Use that word. That's a lovely word. I love the English language and everything that's involved in it.
So cute.
Use lovely. But cutie is...
Do you know, you're the first... That's the first thing, isn't it? So literally all I should have done at 12 o'clock was say, here's a story, here are some words. I don't really understand what's going on. But you've already given me lesson number 1, which is there's a huge distinction between the word cute and the word lovely.
Oh, my God, yes. I love the word lovely. And I love the word darling. Darling. And it sounds a bit like darling, it's a bit like... But there are some beautiful words that are not used in the English language, and please use them. And the other thing, sorry, before I go...
No, you take all the time you want. I'm not going to tell you to... No, absolutely.
He also says, if I come downstairs and we're going out for a meal, he goes, oh, you look nice. And I got promoted to very nice after 10 years. And that's all he ever says. I mean, your sister can look nice. I mean, I would love it to come home. He comes home and he goes, "Cool, you upstairs, no clothes now," or something like that.
Well, this has taken quite a turn.
Brilliant. But no, you look very nice.
Yes.
Very nice, darling.
Have you told him any of this, or are you just sharing it with me and a few?
He's the chin goes up and says, "Oh, I can't do anything right with you,"
Bless.
And it's just like. He's built like a gorilla. He works in intelligence. I can't tell you what he does. He drags. It's almost like he drags his knuckles behind his body.
Yes.
He fills the door, back and front, and all over really. So
it is that simple. It is just use your words. Choose your words more carefully, lads. In the first instance,
lovely is a beautiful word, and we love hearing it. And buy flowers for no reason.
Yes, I don't know that you might have veered slightly off target on the conversation that we're actually having.
It's very romantic.
No, but for the reasons that fit in with the conversation that we're having. I get that. I mean, the other thing you've reminded me of is the phenomenon of introducing your wife or your girlfriend, speaking as a man, to another man, and him commenting on how good looking she is. I actually come back quickly, Mia. How do you feel about that?
If someone commented on how I look,
no. If we were married and I introduced you to a colleague, and he said, "God, you're really punching above your weight," or "You're really beautiful," to me, or said to you, "You're really beautiful." What does? Because I think that's really weird.
It is. I would probably blush and just stand closer to you, like what's going on.
Because that happens. That happens.
But it would be a compliment, and all compliments are meant in a nice way. It depends on how it's said.
Well, cutie's meant as a compliment, though, as well.
No, it's just no.
It's not, is it? No, you're right. No. There is something here, and you have edged us closer to it. But I feel that we're not quite in the water yet. What is? I mean, certainly that distinction between cutie and lovely, I find it deeply weird. Deeply weird when you in person, face to face, introduce someone to someone and they comment on how good looking your partner is. It obviously never happens to my wife, but it happens to me quite a lot. Claire is in Rugby. Claire, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Yes. Hi. I rather think that a lot of the language used infantilizing
There it is.
women.
That's the word. Yes, of course it does.
Because, if I can just mention this, when I must have been around 10 years old. I'm now 63. So at that time, the newsreaders were almost always men. I think they always were until Angela Rippon arrived. But there was probably one. And the weatherman did the weather. And then they started introducing women to doing the weather, for example. And I remember my older brother, I'm sure he wouldn't think that's now, well, I hope not, but he sort of dismissed them and said, well, the weatherman is very knowledgeable about the weather. But the weather girls, they just read off a script. They don't, in effect, they were not classed, in his mind, as of, he was 14 at the time, so, so that language immediately means that they are not worthy of respect.
Whether woman would have a different cachet, and that's partly why we change language, and people sometimes get upset about it. If we were to say we're the person, we're the correspondent, we'll make it actually a gender-neutral phrase, and it would lose some of the connotations you describe.
Well, I don't think we refer to them as we're the girls now, do we?
I don't know. Probably not.
Yeah. It seems to me that once you infantilize people, they are disempowered. They're just children.
I think that's the word that's missing.
I
think that is the word that is missing from this story. Is that you talk about gender biases and traditional stereotypes, but it is infantilizing because yes, it is sugar and spice. What is it? Sugar and spice and all things nice, isn't it? It's that kind of stuff you're making. Whereas you don't speak to men like that. You don't use. What word would you ascribe to a boy that you wouldn't ascribe to a man? Brave, probably. But Mummy's brave little soldier. Thank you, Claire. This is really, really interesting. I mean, I knew it would be, but I didn't know. So here you go. I never tell my niece she's beautiful. I always tell her she is smart and strong. Sue's not very happy with lovely. So I don't know that the cute versus lovely conversation is necessarily that fertile, but she says, do not call me lovely, ever. All right, Sue, I won't. Professional, effective, empathetic, looking well, they're all fine, but never lovely. It's sexist. I don't want to know if a colleague thinks I look nice. How dare they comment on my appearance? It gets right on my... And that's a word I can't say on the radio. Christine is in Wokingham. Christine, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that I don't think compliments of women and their intelligence are mutually exclusive.
No.
And the reason is because my daughter, who's just finished 5 years at university, we've always told her she looks beautiful.
Yes.
We've also always told her she's lovely, her dress is cute, she's got ribbons, she was brought up like that, she's a girly girl. However, we've also told her she's clever, she's as good as the boys, and she can do anything she wants. When she was doing her A-levels, one of the boys at her college told her after the mock exams, you can't beat me at physics because you're a girl.
Mm.
And she told him, well, actually, I have beaten you. And furthermore, I've beaten you at chemistry as well.
I like that.
And she's strong, and she knows.
So when you say a girly girl, some people will balk slightly at that, but they're taking away her autonomy, in a sense.
I don't know. I mean, she wears dresses. At the balls she went to at university, I didn't see any of the fellow dentists, the lady dentists, wearing trousers. They all wore ball gowns.
I don't think that's not quite that's not quite what's under discussion here. I don't want to mansplain. No one's suggesting that they'd all be wearing trousers. It's more these words like sweet and cute. So if she did really well in her dentistry exams, and someone commented on how sweet and cute she was, rather than on how clever and successful she was, that's the kind of biased language that I think is being described in the research. As if that's something that only women... Sorry, I'm talking over you. You carry on.
No. I don't think... as I said, I don't think it's one and the same. I mean, we would say it in the same sentence. You know, if she was standing there with her certificate, or if somebody had said, you've done really, really well and you look beautiful.
Yes, but not cute.
No, probably not cute.
Well, that's the only bit where I was getting confused, because cute is the end. This is why Claire's word infantilizing is so helpful. You call a young female graduate who's just aced her exams cute, and you're doing her a disservice. I think I would argue.
Well, probably. I wouldn't call anyone who wasn't 3 cute. I would call a 3-year-old boy cute.
Bingo. Bingo. But you would never call a 30-year-old man cute, whereas a 30-year-old woman can still... Well, we heard it, didn't we? Our first caller gets her bottom tap, get patted and called cutie by her husband.
Yeah, I don't know what my husband would call me, actually. No, he might tap my bottom and call me beautiful, but probably not cutie. I don't think anyone would call me cutie, to be honest.
It's a weird one, and yet we know somewhere that it is limiting creativity. Perpetuating systemic inequalities is the line, which sounds a bit highfalutin and pompous, but actually isn't, because it's about infantilizing, creating different standards of aspiration and achievement. But Christine, a timely reminder, you can easily do both. And we both like that, male or female. You'd like to be complimented both upon your intelligence and upon your looks. Amelia Cox is here now with the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:36. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Sometimes you almost feel the enlightenment kicking in, don't you? When Even if you haven't got the final analysis, you're sort of coming to a better understanding of it, even as you're still not quite able to articulate what it is that you are understanding. Some of the points don't stand up to scrutiny. So Matt talking about showbiz people, but I don't think that oddly, I think terms like darling, sweetie, honey, all of that are gender neutral. It was the late Richard Attenborough who was famous for calling everybody darling. So I don't think you infantilize when you are an equal opportunities deployer of such sort of language. Tricia says it's diminishing. Cutie in particular is diminishing and infantilizing. If you say hi cutie to smiley babies without knowing whether it's a boy or a girl, that's completely different. But if you're doing it to grown women, then you're looking at a different proposition entirely. It comes from Lego. The research was commissioned by Lego, and their vice president of global brand said, in an increasingly AI-driven world, creativity is the magic that will set us apart. Lego play, whether it's free building or instruction-based, helps develop essential skills that are equally relevant to all children in today's world. And the idea is that girls playing with Lego should be just as likely to be playful inventors, curious scientists, daring dreamers and bold adventurers as boys are. I like that. And I get it, or I'm nearly there. Julia's on the Isle of Man. Julia, what can you tell us?
Hi. There's three words that you never hear them really associated with men, which is bossy.
Yeah.
There's never a bossy man being assertive or creative or strong. He's never bossy, but if a woman does it, it's a term quickly used. And sassy and feisty.
Sassy and feisty.
Along similar lines.
Yeah.
You know, you don't get a sassy man or a feisty guy.
Never get a feisty fella. It's a feisty fella. No, you don't. You might, oddly, you might apply it to a tiny boy, to a little boy, feisty.
But again, that's
but
diminishing.
not to a grown man.
We're talking about infantilizing. It's dismissive and diminishing. It's kind of, you can be strong and assertive as a man, but if you do that as a woman,
you're bossy or feisty or
kind of
overbearing.
Get back in your box. Yes, and exactly. So don't step across that line.
And so you dig back to the roots of it, and it's patriarchal. I mean, it is the idea that you really should be looking after a man, and if you're not, you're feisty or bossy or sassy.
Yes, you're not knowing your place. You remember your place, and if you step out of there, then yes,
stay in your lane. Have you? I mean, how much? I suppose I want to know when you realised this in a way, because I'm clearly, for women listening to the programme, the journey of discovery is not necessary, but for me and from other men listening to the programme, the journey of discovery is. But is this something that is innate? You just sort of hear it now, this conversation, and go, oh yeah, that's that thing there that I've known.
I did a culture and communications course a while ago in Canada.
Okay.
And one of the courses we were doing as part of that degree, this came up. But since then, that was bossy. And it's just always stuck with me because I've got a daughter.
Yes.
And the word she uses sometimes, and then I find myself using it with her, and I have to pull myself up as sassy. So don't be cheeky.
Yeah.
The word she uses is sassy. And then I realized, actually, I started using that word. And that's the bit, like, it's having a daughter, you find you put much more, you pay much more attention to what you say. So sassy and bossy.
So you become aware of it. Here's the thing you can answer, given your dual perspective. Why would British girls feel these pressures? This is like the pressure of perfectionism more than the global average. So 71% of British girls say that they have to be more perfect than boys, whereas the global average is only 6%. That surprised me, actually.
Oh, that's huge, yeah. Maybe it just is that, it's, I don't want to use the word colonization, but everything goes back to, tends to go back to that or stem from that.
Yes.
I just think the way our systems and our structures were put in place, and in Britain, we are still so seeped in tradition. And you know what? Sarcasm. I love sarcasm, but it's not a great trait. And I think in Britain we love being sarcastic.
Yes,
it's part of our character.
Oh,
and
but it is actually quite
enables us to carry these things through.
Yes.
maybe.
Yeah, and well, it cuts both ways. It's a good put down, but it's also a good self-protection, like self-delusion almost. Like you say, yeah, funny. That's really fun,
Yeah.
but actually you're hurting inside. Touched on this a little late in the day, but the idea of why the British would suffer more from this, British girls, British young women would suffer more from this than other nationalities. We've got room to include that in our contemplations as well. Speaking of which, as I bid farewell to Julia, take care. It frees up a phone line for you if you want to join in this conversation. 0345 60 60 973 is a good thing. I beg your pardon, is the number. I'm just reading a message from Inevitable. Well, you tell me, from a man or a woman. The Pretenders have a lyric, "Gonna use my sassy," which is from Brass in Pocket, so it's a good thing. Except the Pretenders were singing 30, 40 years ago, Mike, and you've just had a woman telling you why it's not a good thing. Chrissy Hine, perhaps, being a fairly good example of a woman who succeeded in what was at the time very much a man's world, whereas what we're talking about here is trying to create a world that isn't. But hey-ho, words are words. Lucy's in Saffron Walden. So, Lucy, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Sorry
Hello.
about the voice. I've got a little bit of asthma at the moment going on, so sorry about that. When I first heard you talk about the word cutie, I felt really angry, and I didn't really know why. I kind of know why.
Go on.
In my childhood, I was always called cute, or cute by every family member. Oh,
Yeah.
she's so cute. Look at her. I didn't feel cute. I didn't want to be cute, and I didn't really like it. And I couldn't really say, because you're too young.
But you knew you didn't like, because nobody saying it would have done it from anything other than a place of niceness, would they? It wasn't.
No, it was all nice. It was all so nice, still is.
But you knew you didn't like it, even as a young girl.
No.
That's really
I didn't like
interesting.
it. And I went in at 17. This was a long time ago, so it's not context now. But I went in to be a computer-aided designer for designing machinery in factories.
Right.
And I was the only girl on the course and in the apprenticeship. And they did it too. And I recoiled from that and left, even though I got distinctions in my first year.
Gosh.
So now...
Well, that's exactly what this story is about. Literally, I don't think it happens quite so explicitly for a lot of women, but you actually almost got squeezed out of something that you wanted to do because of the processes that we're discussing.
Yeah, because it made me feel like that... And then when I went to work in schools, which I did because I wanted to change things, I wanted to change things, I heard a staff member say, "Oh, I know I shouldn't, but I've got to say for it in the staff room." I said, "Oh, who's that?" And then she said the little girl's name. She said, "She is so cute."
Right.
I absolutely love her both. I recoiled.
Did
and
you?
I thought, oh, I know that little girl really well because I played with them on the playground and quite active with playing. And I thought she'd hate that because she's always got her hands in mud and she's always building stuff in the sensory area. She would hate that.
And that's that's it, though, because if she was a boy, they'd call her brave, or they'd call her...
Yeah, and she had a twin. She had a twin, exactly the same class, everything. But that wasn't the lady's favourite because he was boisterous. He was a boy, and he did Lego, and he did all that. But I tell you what, this girl was so innovative, and you could see she was going to go far. And she was only 5.
But you've picked the words. You've picked the words in the survey. The word that innovative, twice as likely to be attributed to boys, while girls are 7 times more likely to be called sweet, beautiful, or cute. Good Lord. I was going to ask you to explain to someone who's not getting it, but I think you just did anyway, actually. You're literally using some of the words in the in the research itself. And Joe's been in touch to say, actually, the lyric from the Pretenders song is sidestep, not sassy. I'm going to have to check now, Joe, but it would be quite ironic if you were right, which I suspect you probably are. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. Emma in Stockport puts it best. Cute implies that you should... Hang on, I hate it when that happens. Cute implies that you should be looked at, not listened to. It's a very unserious word. There's a very unkind exchange on Twitter here suggesting that... So I think I'm going to mansplain now, so I think you might have misunderstood this one. So I said men over 30 don't get called cute. I didn't mean by women who fancy them. I meant as in it being a sort of acceptable compliment to say, imagine if I do a good thing at work and someone says, God, you're so cute. It just wouldn't happen. But obviously, if you see a bloke you fancy, you might call him cute. I'm not completely silly. But this exchange here says, maybe it's just James that never gets called cute. That's not very nice. I mean, it might be true, but with respect and at risk of mansplaining, you're missing the point. And Emma has got it completely. It's about implying that you should be looked at and not listened to. So I would go so far as to say, although I wouldn't hold this against someone if they were my age or certainly older, but when you are introducing your female partner to an older male friend or colleague and they immediately comment on her looks, I find it really weird. And they think I should be flattered. When they say, oh, you're punching above your weight or whatever, it's just really weird. Because there are so many interesting things about this person that you are arguably not going to discover or care about if you're going to go in on, gosh, you're cute. Natalie's in list. Natalie, what would you like to say?
Hi. When I was younger, well, much younger, I got a Christmas card from my grandma who wrote to the most beautiful granddaughter in the world.
Yeah.
And my younger brother got one saying to the cleverest grandson in the world.
Gosh. Good Lord. Oh, blimey. There it is. It's a good job you didn't ring him first. That would have shut down the whole conversation.
That just really, really got to me. I wanted to be clever. I didn't want to be beautiful. And I think it really did affect me because I just thought, well, that's my role, to be beautiful. And I was always in his shadows, even though he was younger than me.
Well, I never. How old were you when that happened? Can you remember roughly?
Probably about 8 or 9.
I think there's a real issue of agency here as well, isn't there? So the earlier caller saying she was about 4 when she realised she didn't like being called cute. It wouldn't really cross the average adult's mind that was something that you were either going to clock or actually object to. But when you put it like that, it makes perfect sense. And do you know what would have happened if you'd complained?
Oh, she would have been devastated. But I wouldn't have.
But they'd have called you feisty. They'd have called you feisty.
True. Well, I get called that as well.
It's crazy, isn't it? And I don't know if you can answer this because it's going to be one of those things that happens under the surface. But does it have? I mean, you mentioned your brother being prioritised over the expectations of your brother from loving parents and grandparents would, by dint of gender alone, would have been completely different.
Yeah, he was definitely pushed academically. He was pushed through the private sector, through education, got scholarships, went on to university, whereas I was just, education wasn't deemed as important for me because I was just beautiful.
And which, again, some people will find it very hard to understand how anybody could be undesiring of being complimented for their looks. But as I said a moment ago, there is so much more to a person than that. I guess those of us who aren't regularly complimented for our looks struggle the most, perhaps, to understand the point that you make. But it's a point of absolute clarity, and also in terms of what you want to achieve in life and what you want to achieve in the world. Being a cute child is worth absolutely butt kiss. Thank you, Natalie. Mary's in Bristol. Mary, what would you like to say?
Hi, I was just going to recount I'm in my mid-60s now, but when I was in, say, my early 30s, my father, he worked in a senior position in London, and he retired, and they made a sort of like in their company sort of newsletter.
Yes.
They did a little sort of, wonderful things about him kind of thing. And they mentioned his family life, and I've got 3 older brothers. And in this article, they said, his oldest son is a farmer, his middle son is an engineer, youngest son is an accountant, and his daughter is married and lives in Bristol. And at the time, I was, I'd got a degree, I was a teacher, I'd left teaching, and then I'd actually retrained as a computer programmer. Now, I'm not saying, my parents were wonderful, wonderful people, and I'm not saying that my dad asked them to put this in, but I think that was just the sort of supposition at the time was it was, better to maybe describe me in relation to a man. My status is, linked to that of a man.
It's both. I think this would have been a very different listen for women and men. And then there would have been another distinction. This whole hour on age as well, but it's somehow simultaneously extraordinary and ordinary, what you're describing, isn't it? It's perfectly ordinary behaviour, but the more you think about it, if you can, in a kind of social vacuum, the more extraordinary it appears. Your brother the farmer and his sister the wife.
Yeah, exactly. You are defined by sort of your relationship to a man. Or you were at that time. I think it's changed now. I hope it's changed now.
Well, it's changing, but it certainly hasn't changed completely, because there are still words that we'd never dream of applying to little girls, like, or I shouldn't say that, but you are 7 times more likely to be called sweet, beautiful and cute if you're a little girl than you are if you're a little boy. Yeah, I was always very careful with my daughter to sort of not to say, you're beautiful, and then to my son, you're clever. So, I tried my best to, but, the societal pressures are there. Other people say it, even if you don't say it. They really do. They really do.
And I think, one of the things that there's is it called the Rohrback test or something like that, of films, where when you've got 2 women in a film, and the instances of them talking to each other and not talking about a man, and quite few and far between, I think. No,
it is. It is Rohrback or raw batch, isn't it? Test, and I mean, it is absolutely extraordinary when you have it, when you are told about it, and even films that feature a lot of dialogue between women fail the test sometimes, because the dialogue is, as Mary reminds us, disproportionately about men. And listen, I don't know that this needs sharing, but you've sent it in, so I'll read it out, and it might be helpful. Up until about the 60s, the most important thing a woman could be was beautiful, because that was the only path in life they had, being a wife. I don't know that we needed that explaining, but clearly it goes way, way, way back in history, where the value of a woman was determined by her physical appearance. So it became perfectly natural to start at incredibly early ages describing cuteness and sweetness and all of these things that actually we've discovered, even when we were young, girls were finding obnoxious. The Bechdel test is the one that we're talking about. I don't know I don't know where we got raw batch from. Is that the one where you show people pictures and ask them what it? Rorschach is the ink. I'm mansplaining the Bechdel test. This is a new low for me. I'm mansplaining the Bechdel test to a woman. Well, anyway, in for a penny. If you missed any... Oh, no, hang on. I've got a few minutes left. I can't squeeze in Natasha, can I, in High Wycombe? Natasha, can you do it in 30 seconds, or would that be unreasonable?
No, I'll try my best.
Go on.
So essentially, cute. I was called cute my entire life, and I kind of found that I thought it was unwanting, because there are women that are beautiful and sexy and all of these things. And I was quite a tomboy. I'd climb things, build things, like a lot of things. My brother, also treated like the clever kid, was completely impractical. I could do far more than he could in the house in general.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I became a practical person doing sound engineer, and now I'm called sassy. Now I'm called this person is just a bit more attitude, is a bit harder.
Yeah.
And I think that is connected.
And if it was a man, it would be an attribute. And because you're a woman, it's almost seen as a negative. And therein lies the absolute nub of this entire conversation. Thank you for bringing it home so perfectly, Natasha. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you very much, James. Married, 2 children. I'm a radio presenter, you know.
James O'Brien on LBC.